Almost everyone assumes AT&T kept the timing advance records in the Idaho4 case, even after the official retention period expired. After all, they're one of the largest companies in the world. Why wouldn't they? The answer has nothing to do with willingness. It has everything to do with scale. Most of us think about data based on our own experience. We save photos, we save documents, we back up our computers. If we need more space, we buy a larger hard drive. So when we hear that AT&T only retained timing advance records for 7 days, the natural reaction is, why didn't they just keep them longer? But that's looking at the problem from the wrong perspective. You're picturing investigators asking AT&T for a record that was already sitting in a database someplace. AT&T wasn't managing a database. It was operating one of the largest cellular networks in the country. More than 200 million devices were connected to that network in 2022. Almost every one of those devices was constantly communicating with the network just to stay connected. Those communications create what's known as signaling events. Industry research estimates that a lightly used phone generates somewhere between 600 and 800 signaling events every day. A heavily used phone can generate 8,000 to 10,000 signaling events every day. Now multiply that by more than 200 million devices. At the low end, you're talking about roughly 120 billion signaling events every day. At the high end, you're approaching 2 trillion signaling events every day. AT&T itself gives you an idea of that scale. The company says the network moves an exabyte of data, 1 billion gigabytes on an average day. I'm not saying an exabyte of that is signaling data or that it's all stored. AT&T's comments allow you to simply appreciate the scale of the system that people are talking about when they say, oh, AT&T probably kept the records anyway. Now think about what a retention policy actually is. It's not written for future criminal investigations. It's written for the people who have to operate the network every day. The records that help investigators reconstruct events months later aren't necessarily the same records that a carrier needs to keep operating its network tomorrow morning. Those are two different problems with two different priorities. And then there's another part of this that rarely gets mentioned. Bryan Kohberger wasn't arrested until 47 days after the crime. If a particular type of record was only retained for 7 days, those records would have been gone long before investigators knew they were looking at Mr. Kohberger. But notice what I didn't say. I didn't say timing advance records couldn't be obtained. The victims were identified almost immediately. Investigators knew whose phone they were dealing with from the very beginning. If they believed timing advance records from those devices were important, they had the opportunity to request them while those records were still within the documented retention period. Mr. Kohberger's phone was different. Investigators didn't know that he was their suspect during that first week. By the time they did, 47 days had passed. So when people say AT&T probably still had the records, I think they're skipping over one of the most important parts of the timeline. The question wasn't whether a timing advance records existed on November 13th. They did. The question is whether they still existed 47 days later when investigators knew whose phone they wanted to examine. Those are two very different questions. If you like my videos and how I present the information, please subscribe and like the video.